Well, hello, friends. Ryan here, professional life coach, Enneagram educator, and your host for this episode of Fourward Bound with the Enneagram. You know, the Enneagram is a powerful tool for building understanding, compassion, and achieving growth in our lives, grounded by 9 types or ways that our personalities and egos are structured. The conversations in this podcast are designed to illuminate the Enneagram in action by hearing directly from individuals who are working with the Enneagram and their type in their lives. The views reflected in these conversations are personal, and so what one person shares may not be true for all others who identify as their particular Enneagram type, and that's okay. My encouragement: listen with compassionate curiosity. Thanks for being with us. So today we are moving close to Enneagram Type 7. We often refer to Type 7 as the Epicure. We'll talk more about that as we go. And my guest today is my friend Eboni. And so, Eboni, welcome in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My gosh, I say thank you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I have shared in a prior episode that I lead with Type 4, and this is an unfair statement. It's like not true, so I'll just say that before I say it out loud, because
Okay.
there are no polar opposites on the Enneagram. But in some ways, as a 4, it feels to me that 7 is like sometimes on the other side of the earth, and it is so attractive to me for that reason. And so, I actually have like cold chills thinking about all
Oh,
the fun that we're going to have talking today. And so thank you.
thank you.
Um, want the conversation, Eboni, to be mostly about your experience living with, leading with, knowing Type 7, working with Type 7. But if it's okay with you, just for our listeners who may not know as much about the type already, I'd like to share just a little bit of a brief recording that gives an overview of the type. So okay with you if I start there and then we'll...
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay. All right, awesome. Here we go. Let's take a look together at Enneagram Type 7, often referred to as the Epicure. We start by looking at the instinctual center of intelligence for the type. This could be head, heart, or body. Type 7 leads from the head center. They process the world primarily through their thoughts and ideas. These are individuals who are naturally inclined towards novelty, possibilities, and a plethora of experiences. Epicures are often known by their adventurous spirit and their pursuit of joy. 2 driving attentions emerge for Type 7. We'll refer to those as gluttony and the avoidance of pain. First, let's look at gluttony. Rooted in a fear of missing out on life's experiences, the Epicure seeks to accumulate as much positivity, adventure, and excitement as possible. This isn't limited to material possessions. It often includes accumulating diverse experiences, ideas, and plans. Individuals who lead with Type 7 often find themselves diving into multiple interests, hopping from one idea to another and gathering a multitude of experiences. They thrive on the thrill of exploring new avenues, sometimes struggling to stay focused on one thing for long. For Type 7, more is the name of the game, typically uninterested in any limits that might be placed on their options and possibilities. And then there is the avoidance of pain. The Epicure fears that getting stuck in discomfort will hinder their pursuit of happiness and adventure. They prefer to keep things light and divert their attention from anything that might trigger discomfort. This can cause individuals who lead with Type 7 to struggle with identifying or confronting their own emotional depths. And now let's look at the virtue for the type, this highest expression of their potential. Think of it as keeping all the gifts for the type, and then also uncovering or remembering a piece of truth that has been forgotten along the way. For Type 7, we refer to the virtue as constancy. Think of constancy as the ability to continue in a course of action without having to introduce diversions or exciting secondary plans. Being, resting even, in the fullness and completeness of the present moment, no matter what level of activity or type of emotion it brings. Through the practice of constancy, Epicures come to be present with both the positive and negative aspects of life. They recognize that genuine fulfillment comes from inner balance and acceptance of reality rather than escapism. This is a remembering of holy wisdom, that the universe operates in such a way that we can know and experience completeness moment to moment by simply being with and moving in the direction of the natural unfolding. So, I think it's important to say before we go any further that that's really just a place from which to start the conversation. No one is a caricature of a type, so sevens show up in myriad ways. And Ebony, really want to, for the remainder of our time together, just center and privilege your experience. And so I think it'd be interesting just to start kind of open-ended from you and tell us a little bit about what's it like to lead with type 7. What comes up first for you here this morning?
So, what I have heard like all my life, and this is before I was introduced to the Enneagram and, started to learn and better understand the Enneagram and my type and other types as well. But one of the things that I've always heard about myself is that I'm very outgoing, that I'm oftentimes or sometimes viewed as like the life of the party, looking to have a good time, always quote unquote down to try new things. And so when I started to learn right about the Enneagram and specifically identify as a seven, some of those things that have been a constant in my life in terms of things that I've heard about myself and things that I felt about myself really started to align and fall into place. Like for me, it was
Mm,
very easy for me to identify as a seven as I was doing kind of a general read through all of the types. I easily gravitated towards seven. I was like, that is me.
mhm.
The piece about not wanting to confront like difficult emotions and feelings, absolutely. That
Mhm.
that too is me. And it's interesting. One of the things that I recognized in myself in college was that laughing was a defense mechanism for me
Okay.
in
Yeah.
situations. Including, there, I'm that person who they tell you, don't sit next to in a meeting. If something is said or happens, I start to giggle and I'm struggling not to break a smile. But
Mhm.
oftentimes too, when there are things that come up in me, just feelings that feel uneasy
Mhm.
for some reason, I would start to laugh.
Okay.
And so again, it wasn't until I started to learn and understand more about the seven that I was able to understand and kind of realize
Yeah.
like, hey, this is kind of why I have and am the way that I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I love the idea like of laughter as a defense mechanism, or at least that clarity, that you bring about that. I don't want to spend too much time in the like, quote unquote negative or the work, but because we're here right now for just a minute, it might be interesting if you're okay to stick with this.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like knowing what you know now about your type and how it operates, what would you say about what your felt or sensed experience is, like your inner interior experience when things start coming up for you that are difficult or painful? Like just what would you say to for us about what that feels like for you?
So definitely now that I have, again, learned more about, and I'm still learning, right, about
Yeah.
being a seven and what that is like. There are times where previously things would happen, and word that is commonly used with the Enneagram is I would start to disintegrate
Mm,
and had no reason as to why all of a sudden I just kind of felt like the world, like things would feel like the world was coming to an end. And it
mhm,
wasn't until I started learning more about my type to understand that, with sevens, oftentimes, again, we're adventurous, we're kind of a go with well, I'll say for me, excuse me,
yeah.
can be a go with the flow type person and not necessarily need a lot of structure or need a lot of parameters. But
Mhm,
in those instances and situations where I did put structure in place, and oftentimes I noticed that it was professionally in a work setting, that is when I do tend to be more structured. And with my calendar, it's color coded because colors make things nice and warm and fuzzy, but there's still the structure. But
yeah.
when I've taken the time to plan something out, and when those plans do not go according to the way that I was wanting to,
Mm-hmm.
um, I start to disintegrate. Again, had no idea what that was and what that meant until I
Yep.
started learning about the Enneagram. But it
Yep.
would literally feel like the world was coming to an end. And I felt like, how is it that nobody else realizes how big of a deal this is? And this is not the way this is supposed to go. And oh my gosh, things are ruined. And it would
Mm-hmm.
feel like that. It would feel like whatever it was that I was working towards just wasn't going to be able to happen. Like, you know what? We'll just
Yeah.
F it, just stop. We just won't worry about it anymore. Versus taking time to just stop and pause, which I'm able to do now,
Yeah.
and recognize, okay, Eboni, you're spiraling. So I need to just stop for a second, kind of step to the side, and really just kind of process, okay, what is it that I can do in this moment that maybe it's not the way that I was wanting to do it, um, but I
Yeah.
can make some adjustments
Yeah.
so that I can keep getting to the end goal. And luckily, it doesn't happen often, but when
Right.
it does happen, again, it feels like the world is crashing down
Yeah.
around me.
And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm asking this really as a
Mm-hmm.
question, though it may sound like a statement, but it sounds like in those instances, the tendency isn't to like then think about how can I pivot and make this work and like remain optimistic necessarily about it, but it's like when it feels like it's all crumbling, it's like it's all crumbling and I just want out. Like the
Yes.
end, it's not going to work out. The end, I'm over it, done, period.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is said about sevens, which I have recognized and seen in myself and other people who have identified as sevens, is when things do get difficult, and it doesn't have to be extremely difficult, but when
Right.
things sometimes just even get a little bit uneasy, we do look for, or sevens typically look for the way out. Like you
Yeah.
said, versus trying to maybe modify or make adjustments. It's
Yeah.
just better to just not have to deal with it. So I'm
Yeah.
out. I'm
Yeah.
leaving. Done.
Yeah. And I want to honor and just reaffirm something that you already said earlier. But for folks who are listening, it's like we've spent some time here talking about this, but this is not the daily occurrence for seven. This is like when the, crap hits the fan and
Mm-hmm.
it's like really in stress.
Yes.
Which may be more common for some folks,
Mm-hmm.
in their day to day, just based on what their place and situation is in life. But generally speaking, this is about how the seven interacts with and responds to stress.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
that is correct. And two, because I think there are a lot of times with sevens, because again, we prefer to live in the warm and fuzzy
Yeah.
and the highly energetic. There are oftentimes too when things do happen that, aren't so great, that we're able to ignore, kind of push to the side or overcompensate
Yep.
for. But when we're not able to do those things, which are kind of
Yep.
again daily coping mechanisms to avoid
Yep.
negative feelings, when it gets to the place that we can't even use those coping mechanisms
Yep.
and things, yeah, we are just like, it's a
Yep.
wrap. Bye bye.
And thanks. That's actually a really interesting pivot. So one of the what we call the defense mechanism for type 7, I refer to it as rationalization. And we don't touch on this. I didn't touch on this in the video, but this like because the 7 lives in the head center type or leads from the head center, there's this until it gets to the point where it's like the end, I'm out, there is this desire to like reframe to another positive potentiality. I mean, I'm seeing the smile. Our listeners aren't going to hear that, but talk a little bit about how this notion of rationalization operates in your life, maybe even an example if you'd be comfortable sharing one.
Yeah, so I'll actually use, so one of the things with 7 hour, quote unquote, the negative thing about, negative's not the right word, right? But the not so warm and fuzzy, right? It's
Hmm.
gluttony with
Hmm.
sevens. It
Hmm.
is um excessiveness with things. And it's interesting because again, something that was not able to recognize and understand, but that is absolutely something that I've done all my life. I'm not good with moderation whatsoever.
Okay.
Um, and so for example, during COVID, at the beginning of it, we're home. So we're doing things we hadn't really spent a lot of time doing. I started enjoying making cocktails at the house because I'm not going anywhere. And started to realize, of course, I'm quickly starting to gain weight
Okay.
because, right, I'm having more than what I normally would because I'm actually out of the house. And because I realized that, I was like, I need to shift this excessiveness. And it's not like I was,
Sure.
stumbling in the house, but it was
Yeah.
again more than what I was typically drinking. I was like, I need to switch this. And so I started getting outside to move. And so shifting to, okay, if I'm going to be excessive about something, let me be excessive about something that is going to benefit me.
Okay.
Um, and I did. I even with working out, I started to get a little obsessive with that. I rationalized that to say, it's fine that I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to work out for an hour. And then in the afternoon, I'll work out for another hour because I'm doing something that's healthy. I'm moving, I'm being physically fit.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not necessarily good either. And so
Yeah.
it's hard to sometimes find that center to do right, the
Yep.
healthy balance of things.
Yeah. I think that's a great example. And I think, really instructive for, folks who are maybe considering, gosh, how am I rationalizing? I mean, we all do this to a certain extent, right? Like this is not something that's specific and necessarily unique to the seven, but the frequency with which the
Mhm.
seven does it, it is sort of a natural go-to defense mechanism. Um, let's pivot a little bit, and I would love to hear you talk just freeform a little bit about like what are the gifts of the seven? What are the things that come just naturally and organically to you that show up as a really beautiful thing and helpful for the world?
One of the things I mentioned that I realized about myself and people have also commented about is just my natural ability to be social. I'm one of those people who can walk into a room, go to into a space that might not be familiar with people that I don't know, and I'm pretty comfortable with connecting with people. And I also find too that while for me, right, I enjoy making connections with people, I also do pretty well with connecting others.
Hmm.
And so when I tend to be in groups of people with someone who maybe is not as outgoing or not as comfortable meeting new people, we'll make a connection to say, hey, such and such, this is my friend. Did you,
Yeah.
both of you all are from, Michigan or whatever, as a way to kind of connect people.
Yeah.
I also feel too like I am, and it's interesting because I first recognized this in my mom. She's not a seven, but as a child, and my husband even talks about the fact that my mom sees the positive she will find the positive in every situation.
Hmm.
And I have noticed that when other people are having hard times, that that's the first thing I want to do. Because again, I struggle with dealing with difficult and uncomfortable feelings. And so rather than having to address what is the not so positive thing,
Hmm.
I'm going to find the positive.
Yeah.
Um, and so people will say that that is soothing and comforting for them.
Yeah.
But what I've again learned about myself is that is my way of being able to be in that space,
Yeah.
um, and avoid, if you will, right, what is uncomfortable. I think too with the piece about enjoying new experiences,
Hmm.
that is definitely something that resonates with me. And it's funny because even in the video clip, which people may not see, but there was the image of somebody ziplining,
Hmm.
and during family vacation this summer, some people, and it was most of the younger people, wanted to go to this adventure park. And I was the first adult, like, yes, sign me up. And we
Right.
ziplined and we did ATVs and all the things. And so I have friends that will say, well, I'll try it because you're willing to try it. Or I'm also the one that's like, hey, y'all, like, let's go do this. And I will drag people along.
Yeah.
Um, and material things aren't really big for me.
Hmm.
It is the experiences. It
More about
is the making
experiences.
the
Yeah.
memories. And it's something that's interesting as well, that for whatever reason, when I was in college, I just had this feeling that I'm going to, when I get older, have dementia. And so I'm very intentional about taking lots of pictures and videos,
Mm.
because I feel like when I start, right, to lose my memory, if that happens, that pictures will help to spark my memory and to bring me back and to
Okay.
remember those
Okay.
things. And and the pictures that I take are usually, of course, we're having fun. So it's something
Hmm.
jovial, right? And so I
Yeah.
feel like seeing that will help trigger my memory or help to take me back to that good place.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I love that. And I think, really speaking to the like almost insatiable appetite for adventure and fun that we oftentimes hear folks who are seven speak to. And I think, you're you mentioned ziplining. I think it's also, though, important to note if anyone's listening and sort of thinking, "Am I a seven?" This lust, if you will, for adventure can take many different shapes.
Mhm.
And oftentimes for sevens, it does take many different shapes. It's sort of like, I think what we hear is it's all across life. But, I talk to some folks like, well, I'm not a bungee jumper. I'm not a zip liner. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't lead with type
Right.
seven. It just means that that's where you've drawn the line,
Mhm.
for adventure. The other thing that I'd love that you said, Ebony, that I'd love to dig in on just a little bit more is you were talking about, I would say, restate it as just being a natural connector of people. And I think what this is actually a really interesting demonstration of the active mind of the seven and seeing connections
Mhm.
almost everywhere. Like being able to look at things that are seemingly disconnected and find a way to synthesize it into something that makes sense together. And again, I'm seeing like the smile, I call it the blush of the Enneagram. But what would
Yes.
you say about this natural ability to see connections between things?
I- For me, it is the way that I am able to establish and nurture relationships with people, which
Yeah.
again, I'm a very people person. I thrive
Hmm.
off of energy of others.
Hmm.
Um, and two, it is a way to really get to know people. Depending on the spaces and the places where we meet others, it might be in a professional setting. And, sometimes in certain professional settings, it is not the norm to share personal things about oneself. And so there's
Hmm.
this kind of like this facade, if you will, that we put up sometimes in certain professional spaces that share nothing about who we are as people and things that we enjoy and our experiences. And for me, that is the way that I find myself. And I try not to use the word connect, but that I get close to people.
Yeah.
Also, to feel like because we don't spend a lot of time in certain spaces, other than with our close personal friends and family, we don't spend a lot of times in our lives sharing about who we are and the things that we like. I feel like people enjoy though talking about those things and want to do more of that.
Hmm.
And so when I'm able to make those connections, and I'm also bad with names. That's another thing too. I'm bad with names, I'm great with faces, but I will remember one kind of what is typically considered random thing about somebody and say, "Hey, Michigan," or "Hey, you're the one who," whatever the thing is. And
Yeah.
you can kind of see like the joy and excitement in their face that, oh my gosh, like most people remember me by what I do, my title, but you remember me for me and as the things that I like or something that I shared about myself.
Yeah.
And so I think too that helps to draw people out who are not, again, oftentimes comfortable
Yeah.
in opening up around others. But when people realize that people really do have an interest, right, in
Hmm.
getting to know more about others, that really helps people to open up. And there's also the trust thing too, right? I think it shows people that you genuinely are interested in getting to know them for who they are,
Yeah.
and will tend to be more willing and comfortable in opening up. And I'm also just, for me, I'm just usually just fascinated because I think about how many people in a day I pass, be it on the street, if I'm in my car driving, be it in the grocery store, who literally, this is probably one time in my life that maybe I'll cross their paths and they probably have a very fascinating life story. And it's like there's so many life stories to know about. There's not enough time, but I thrive off of just kind of learning more about different lived
Yeah.
experiences that people
Yeah.
have. And two, while there might be a lot of differences, there's usually some type of commonality, and it's just through getting to know people that you're able to find
Yeah.
that.
Well, I want to just acknowledge a couple things. One, it's like we hear the forward momentum and the energy and the enthusiasm of the seven. I mean, you just said it like beautifully, which is like there's so many stories and there's not enough time. I mean, but it's like this hunger and this thirst
Mhm.
to know it all, to like figure it all out, to connect with all
Yes.
the people, to hear all the stories. And then, this desire, and it's not even, I mean, it's like it is a desire, but it's also just happens so naturally for you to think about the connections, to
Mhm.
find the connections.
Yes.
And, this feels probably like second nature to you, but I just say to you as a four, I look out at the world and see all the disconnections.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is what I'm saying when I feel like to a
Mm-hmm.
certain extent there's almost an opposite attraction here. Like I see how I'm disconnected,
Mm-hmm.
which is my life's work to overcome that because of course that's not true. But you just so very naturally find all the connection points and so thank you. That's just a beautiful sharing. I love it.
Well, thank you.
Ebony, what do you think about limits?
Oh, right.
Yeah,
The first thing I hear when you say what I think about limits is being told no.
yeah,
That's the very first thing that came to mind, which I'm not a fan of. I don't
yeah.
appreciate, and that is something I have to check in myself, because a lot of times when I hear no, I take it personal that means that
Mm,
there's something wrong with me as to why somebody's saying I can't do something. Not that it
mm.
can't be done, but somebody's telling me that Ebony can't do it and shouldn't do it. It's not
Interesting.
supposed to do it. So I take it very personal. Also, again, right, gluttony is the thing for
Yeah,
sevens. And
yeah,
so, right, that means doing things with no limits, which is not
yeah,
always a great thing.
yeah.
So my initial kind of instinct is like limits are bad. Like limits
Hmm.
restrict people because I think
Yeah,
too about the potential that is in so many people for a variety of different things that is never tapped into because there are limits and restrictions placed on people. You know,
yeah.
I'm a parent, and one of the things that I've had to be very intentional about is the balance of right parenting and making sure that my child is safe, but not restricting his potential. Because while there might be something that he asks to do or expresses an interest in that might
Hmm.
be unfamiliar to me, that might be scary because I don't know how to do it, my saying no could be limiting what is his purpose.
Yeah,
um and so that's, it can be very, very, for me, like I said, when I hear limits, like it's a negative thing. It can
yeah,
cause problems, but I know realistically, right, that there's a reason why in some cases there are
yeah,
limits, because maybe people have gotten hurt or people are overdoing things or taking advantage of something which causes harm to others.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, time flies in these conversations. I've got just one more question for you for today, but maybe this won't be the first and only conversation that we'll have with you. But I'd love to hear just a little bit about what you think about this notion of constancy. You know that we talked about in the intro, or sometimes we call it fortitude, but it's just like this like sticking with itness, like staying the course. And what you could say about your maybe initial response to that idea, just sort of gutturally, but then also if you've got maybe anything to share about how that has operated in your life in ways that you see a lot of benefit from.
So it's interesting because for me, consistently, right, having relationships with people, like
Hmm.
people, is a big part of, I feel like, what kind of makes me happy,
Hmm.
what I enjoy in life. And so nurturing like friendships. And that's something, and I'll be honest too, that it wasn't until I probably got to college that I really started to learn and lean more into like healthy relationships. Not that I'd had relationships that were bad, but meaning that, right, relationships, be it whatever kind they are, they're not going to be completely perfect and wonderful. You're going to hit like stumbling blocks.
Hmm.
But because, right, when things get a little uncomfortable, I avoid it. So therefore I didn't have a lot of experience in addressing
Okay.
those sticky situations and still being able to maintain a relationship with somebody, to see that you can have hard times in a relationship,
Yeah.
work it out, and still be okay.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I've gotten better as it relates to the relationships that I have and the things
Yep.
that I enjoy. Because if things started to get a little uncomfortable with certain people, where maybe we started to have disagreements, then I was okay again, right? I'm okay with leaving if something
Yep.
seems too difficult for me. I was okay with letting a relationship or friendship go to the wayside. But what's interesting though, in terms of consistency, and there's kind of, I think, a double-edged sword with that, is while I do, like trying new things, I will find something that I'm good at and I'll go all in.
Hmm.
But then there might come a point where I get bored with it. And so
Yeah.
then I don't keep it up.
Yeah.
And so yes, sevens, and I'm not going to generalize, but I'll say for myself, if you have a concept and you need ideas, I'm the person to come to. I'll have ideas.
Hmm.
Now, planning and execution might not always be my strong suit.
Right. Right.
Um, but
Yeah.
I can start with something new in a heartbeat. Now, how long I carry it out is
Yeah.
a whole nother story because
Yeah.
I get bored I get bored easily with some things, and I'm okay with like, oh, I've done it, had that experience to say that
Hmm.
I've done it, but I'm okay with not doing it anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and this like never-ending font of ideas and concepts and possibilities is one of the really beautiful gifts of the seven to the world. And so maybe they don't all need to be like executed and implemented, and that's okay. But it sounds like you've got, the receipts on why sticking with things. I mean, and you've shared, I think, really beautifully about how this plays out in relationships, but it's like the sticking with it even through the like bumps in the road and the hardships, something that maybe doesn't come second nature to the seven, but truly is worth the effort, when something really matters and when something is really important. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Nice. Well, Ebony, what other just goodness can you offer to us here in our final moments together?
So one thing I will share about sevens is, or at least for myself as a seven, while I absolutely, like I said, I love people. I thrive off of energy of others, but I will overdo it. And so one of the things I recognize a little bit later in life or more recently in life is that I also need to sometimes just sit myself down and be still.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy nature. I'm a water girl. Like water is my
Mm,
happy place.
nice.
And that is how I recharge is right sitting still. I also I don't know if it's just age, but I also too find that the things that I enjoy being people, I'm able to recognize when I'm overstimulated. And so
Okay.
again, where maybe in the past it's just like, oh my gosh, people are getting on my nerves because somebody said this. And it's not that it's other people, it's me. And it's
Yeah.
okay, right, to not constantly be around others. One of the things that I would say, if you are a friend of a seven, there's that expression that strong people need someone to check on them every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely relate to that because I feel like I show up as I'm okay with supporting and comforting others. I'm not always as willing to share what's not going on
Right.
great with myself because I'm trying to avoid it.
Yep.
But I do need, right? I do need somebody to say, hey, need to check in. How are things going? You're always doing this and doing this for others. And again, oftentimes it's an avoidance mechanism. But while yes, we are tend to be the life of the party, sometimes right, the party has to like take a break or something. Somebody needs to
Right.
clean
Right.
up, restock, all those
Yeah.
we need that too in our lives. And so
Nice.
just know that especially if you have a seven who is expressing like, hey, I need a break or my plate is fuller than I would like it to be.
Mm.
Oftentimes for us that is our quote unquote cry for help. That
Yeah.
when we say it's fuller than what we'd like it to be, that means that we have the plate in our hand and we're holding the things that are hanging off the side with the other hand.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that I would share that as well. But too though, we do thrive off of, for me, I'll say, like I said, being that connector. And so for me, it helps me to feel value as a friend to
Hmm.
others when people come to me kind of in those spaces when they recognize that that is not their strength. For me, that is my ministry, right? Connecting
Nice.
and
Yeah.
nurturing relationships is definitely my ministry. And so when you are again in working situations, they tell you to recognize people's strengths and to
Yeah.
help them, allow them to lean into their strengths. Let me not say use people, but allow
Right.
people to right lean into their strengths. And so if you know that you have sevens and you need, right, if you're doing outreach, sevens tend to naturally be comfortable with talking to people they don't know. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
again, lean in. Um,
Nice.
yeah.
Ebony, this has been a treat. It's been a gift for me. I know it's been a gift for folks who are listening along. So thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you.
The first season here are these like one-on-one conversations with folks, just sort of getting close to and getting to know the types. As we look to the future of the podcast, we're going to bring small groups of folks into the space to talk about how types interact, where the intersections are between types, how we can play off one another in helpful or maybe even sometimes in unhelpful ways. And so maybe it'd be interesting for you to come back and join in on one of those later on.
You shouldn't be surprised to hear me say, of course I would, right?
Nice. Okay. All right. Well, listen,
Love it.
thank you so much. Be well, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you are taking away a new learning or insight today, maybe about yourself, someone in your life, or both. If so, time well spent. And if you are ready to explore this work on a more personal level, I invite you to be in touch. Visit us on the web at forwardbound.com. That's FOURWARDBOUND.com. There you can learn more about our coaching and Enneagram education work and schedule yourself for a free of charge discovery call. Finally, we look forward to welcoming you back for another episode of Fourward Bound with the Enneagram very soon. Again, thanks for spending this time with us. Be well.